Melissa pounded on the front door, her door, only it wasn't hers anymore. Her mother had sold the house, quietly, legally, without her. The place she called her future was now someone else's past. No goodbye, no warning, just a locked box and a silent deed. Online, the comments turned. Her followers demanded answers. And 3 towns away, Helen Callahan, her mother, sipped tea, blocked the call, and finally exhaled. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The applause came half a second too late, like everyone was pretending they'd been paying attention all along. Helen Callahan stood frozen just past the patio doors, one hand still on the handle of the screen, watching her daughter lean in over the cake, a 3-tier ombre monstrosity of pinks and purples, and extinguish all 69 candles in a single dramatic exhale. Laughter rippled across the backyard. Not joyful, nervous, social. "Guess Mom needs help now, huh?" Melissa said with a smile that never touched her eyes. She straightened, flipping her sleek blonde hair over her shoulder, then raised her glass. "To the woman who taught me that aging gracefully means giving up carbs, control, and apparently, your taste in music." A few guests chuckled. One man coughed into his wine. Helen stepped onto the grass slowly, heels sinking slightly into the earth, her breath tightening in her chest like she'd forgotten how to arrive in her own life. The white tent flapped gently in the late May breeze. Beneath it, rented tables dressed in gold linens, crystal champagne flutes, catered hors d'oeuvres Helen couldn't pronounce. Nothing familiar. Not one yellow rose, her favorite. No Billie Holiday drifting through the Bluetooth speakers. Just some top 40 playlist Melissa had probably curated herself. A guest in a linen jumpsuit turned and gave her a little wave. "Oh, there she is! The birthday girl!" Helen gave a polite nod. Her cheeks ached from the practiced smile she'd been wearing since 3 p.m. when the setup crew had arrived. She hadn't been allowed to help. Melissa had hired a vision planner. The vision, apparently, was a version of her birthday party in which she was a ghost. Melissa clinked her glass again. "We all know Mom's got 9 lives. 70's around the corner and she still refuses to use reading glasses. Denial is the real skincare secret, huh?" That one got a few louder laughs. A couple people glanced toward Helen, gauging her reaction. She simply smoothed her blouse, soft cream silk, something Melissa had insisted was age-appropriate, and kept walking. The cake's icing shimmered under the fairy lights, pristine and untouched. Melissa had even cut the first slice herself. The candle wax still smoked faintly. Helen's throat burned with something sharp and unnameable. Not anger, not quite. She drifted to the edge of the lawn, next to the buffet table, where the shrimp sat under polished silver domes. Her eyes swept over the crowd, mostly Melissa's friends, a few scattered family members, no one from Helen's book club or the quilting group she'd once tried to start. They hadn't been invited. She hadn't been asked. And yet she'd paid for every chair, every drink, every designer canapé. Melissa was now snapping selfies with the cake, her lips pursed into a kissy smile. Helen stared at the flickering sparklers melting in the grass beside the cake table. She heard a laugh, Melissa's fake laugh, the high-pitched one she used in boardrooms and baby showers. The sound made Helen's stomach twist. Flashback. There'd been a time, another birthday, another life, when Helen stayed up until 3 a.m. stringing paper lanterns in the garage for Melissa's sweet 16. She'd made cupcakes from scratch, folded napkins into roses, and rented a karaoke machine from a guy named Randy who operated out of a bowling alley. Melissa had smiled then. A real smile, a child's smile. Helen blinked it away. That girl didn't exist anymore. She moved toward a small cluster of guests near the mimosa bar, intending to say hello, to thank them for coming. She opened her mouth. "Mom," Melissa hissed, intercepting her. Her lips barely moved as she leaned in. "Don't hover. You should be grateful you're even invited." Helen's breath caught. The words landed with the soft impact of a thrown pillow, but inside, something cracked. She stared at her daughter. Up close, Melissa's contour makeup gave her the bone structure of someone else entirely. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, full of something like resentment or victory. I see, Helen said quietly. Melissa turned away before she could answer. Helen stood there a moment longer. Then, without a word, she pivoted on the spot, walked past the tent, past the bartender adjusting bottles on a mirrored tray, past the rented rose arch. The car keys felt foreign in her hand, like they belonged to a different woman. Once inside her Camry, she sat in the driver's seat for several seconds, the throb of the music from the party still faint through the rolled-up windows. She didn't cry, didn't speak. She reached into her purse. Tucked inside her wallet, beneath her lipstick and the valet stub, was a long white envelope, thick, weighted. She pulled it out. Her fingers hovered over the seal. The deed. Still signed in her name, still notarized, still hers. Helen closed her purse with a soft, deliberate click. She started the engine and drove away. The living room was silent except for the slow tick of the wall clock above the fireplace. Helen sat at the edge of her couch, her back straight as if someone might still be watching, though the only company was a half-drunk glass of Pinot and the faint scent of lavender from the plug-in diffuser Melissa insisted was more modern than candles. The envelope lay on her lap like a sleeping animal, heavy, still, but full of potential violence if stirred. She hadn't opened it since she'd had it notarized 3 weeks ago. Melissa didn't even know it existed. Helen's thumb traced the flap's sealed edge. Her hands no longer trembled. That stopped somewhere on the drive home, somewhere between the third red light and the second time she considered turning back. She didn't. She wouldn't. Outside, a car passed too fast on the residential street, its tires humming low over the pavement like a warning shot. Helen leaned back slowly and unsealed the envelope. Inside, crisp and official, the deed to the house. Her house. Technically still hers, despite months of Melissa hinting, then pushing, then practically salivating at the idea that it would be her inheritance. Not anymore. She had planned to give it to Melissa for her 42nd birthday, quietly, cleanly. A thank you for nothing recent. For biology. For surviving each other. Now, the thought made her stomach sour. She let the papers fall onto the coffee table, their legal lines a black and white contrast to the cracked wood surface Charles had built with his own hands nearly 30 years ago. Charles. The name still stung when she said it silently. The man who died too early, left too much unsaid, and left her to raise a daughter who blamed her for not filling in his gaps. She stood up, pacing. The wood beneath her bare feet was warm where sunlight had slanted across it earlier. Flashback. Helen pushing Melissa's shopping cart through Target during college breaks, always on sale, always calculating whether they could afford 2 sets of sheets, helping her through a divorce, twice. The first time, Melissa had moved back in for 4 months. The second time, she'd drained Helen's savings with a temporary loan that had never come back. Each time, Helen said nothing, just quietly adjusted. Now Melissa had her own job, her own followers, her curated image of empowerment, and not a drop of memory for the woman who'd carried her through the dark. Helen sat back down, staring at the documents again. She reached for the letter opener on the end table, slipped its brass edge under the deed and considered. 1 rip, 1 second. Instead, she folded the envelope again, tighter this time, and slipped it back into her purse. A knock at the back door startled her. She turned and saw the silhouette through the frosted glass. Tall, familiar, steady. Linda. Helen opened the door. "Bad night?" Linda asked. Her silver-gray hair was tied back, lips pinched with concern. She wore a cardigan with tiny gavel buttons, a gift from her retirement party. Helen didn't answer, just walked to the kitchen, grabbed a second wine glass, and poured. Linda accepted it but didn't sip. She nodded at the purse still sitting open on the couch. "You bring it?" Helen nodded. "I figured." They sat in silence for a long moment. "She's my daughter," Helen said finally. "That used to mean something." Linda tilted her head. "Blood doesn't entitle someone to your backbone. Or your house." Helen gave a thin smile. "I was going to give it to her. You still can." "I don't think I want to." Linda set her glass down with quiet finality. "Gratitude isn't inherited, Helen. It's earned." The words echoed, not just through the room, but through every decision Helen hadn't made until now. Helen exhaled slowly. The air felt cleaner somehow. She reached for her phone, her fingers surprisingly steady, and typed 4 words into the search bar. Real estate agents near me. Helen stood in the hallway just past the living room, the overhead light casting her shadow long across the wood floor. The house was silent in the way only old homes could be, each creak of the boards underfoot echoing like a memory she wasn't ready to remember. She walked slowly, fingertips trailing along the molding, tracing years of chipped paint and silent forgiveness. Her house still smelled like lemon oil and a hint of the lavender spray Melissa used to roll her eyes at. The kitchen came first. She paused in the doorway. The same crooked tile above the sink that Charles swore he'd fix. The dent in the cabinet where Melissa, age 11, had hurled a skillet after Helen grounded her for sneaking out. That day ended with both of them sobbing into opposite ends of a silence that never really closed. She stepped in, opened a drawer, found a rubber band ball Melissa made in middle school. For a second, Helen smiled. Then her eyes caught the back window, once fogged with pancake steam on lazy Sunday mornings, and now just a cold pane of glass. She moved on. Melissa's old bedroom still had the pale blue paint Helen fought her over when Melissa wanted black walls at 16. The room was empty now, used for storage and boxes Helen never unpacked after her last attempt to declutter. She opened the closet. The air inside was stale, filled with the scent of old paper and faint perfume. Her fingers brushed past a box labeled yearbooks and a shoebox of dried-out gel pens. At the bottom, folded into the corner, was a piece of notebook paper, creased, yellowing, torn down one edge. She unfolded it. In looping, angry handwriting, "I hate you." Helen stared at it, her eyes scanning the aggressive lines. No signature, no date, but she didn't need one. She remembered the morning Melissa left for college, duffel bag over one shoulder, lip curled in disdain, saying, "If you'd really loved me, you would have let me go to NYU, but you love your checking account more than me." Helen had cried once the car pulled away, but she didn't cry now. She folded the note again, placed it back in the closet, and shut the door. When she turned around, something inside her had shifted. Sorrow had shape-shifted into something sharper. She sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out her phone. The website was simple, just a photo of a modest man in a gray blazer and a tagline: discreet, fair, fast cash offers. Colin Albrecht. She'd remembered the name from Linda's bridge club gossip, someone who helped widows sell without drama. She dialed. It rang twice. "Colin," a calm voice answered. "Yes, my name's Helen Callahan. I have a home I'm considering selling. I was told you handle quiet listings." A pause, then a measured response. "I do. May I ask the location?" She gave it. Another pause, this one a little longer. "That's a strong neighborhood. If you're serious, I can run comps tonight. It's not listed publicly, and I don't want it to be. I specialize in that. What's the condition?" "Solid. Lived in? Maintained? Sentimental value, but not to me anymore." Colin chuckled gently. "Got it. Square footage? 2,100. 3 beds, 2 baths, detached garage." A low whistle. "You're looking at over 900,000. Easy. Could move in 2 weeks or less with the right buyer." Helen exhaled just once, like something heavy had cracked open between her ribs. "Friday," she said. "Can you come Friday?" Helen snapped on the kitchen light and set the heavy file bin on the table like she was lowering a casket. Morning hadn't yet broken through the blinds. Her house was still, but she could feel something shifting beneath the surface, as if the foundation itself was bracing for what came next. She peeled open the plastic lid. The smell hit first: old paper, dried ink, and time. She pulled out one folder at a time: will and testament, insurance, property tax, medical directives, documents she'd once tucked away for someday. Someday was now. She opened her last will and began to read. There, in crisp legal font, Melissa Callahan's name stared back at her: executor, primary beneficiary, medical power of attorney. Helen pressed her pen to the page, one line through each title. Clean, final, no room left for sentiment. She turned to the advance directive and hesitated. The silence in the kitchen thickened. Then she wrote, in calm, deliberate cursive, "No hospital decisions by Melissa Callahan." She signed her name beneath it, the same way she'd once signed field trip forms and tuition checks. By midday, Helen stood inside Ruth Delgado's legal office, surrounded by shelves of legal books and the muted hum of a laser printer spitting out contracts. Ruth, her estate attorney and friend of 12 years, looked up over her glasses as Helen placed the documents on her desk. "I see you've made your intentions extremely clear," Ruth said, thumbing through the pages. "I'm not leaving anything open for misunderstanding," Helen replied. Ruth tapped the deed. "This house is still titled in your name directly?" Helen nodded. "Then here's what I recommend," Ruth said. "Transfer it into a revocable living trust. You'll remain the sole trustee. That means Melissa can't access, sell, or inherit anything unless you say so, and the house stays out of probate if anything happens to you." Helen leaned forward. "Do it. No co-trustees, no automatic transfers, my signature or nothing." "Understood. And the will. This version removes Melissa entirely." "You're sure?" "Yes," Helen said, her voice flat as concrete. "She gets nothing. Not the house, not the heirlooms, not control. And your medical directives, I already updated them," Helen interrupted. "No hospital decisions by Melissa. I don't care if I'm in a coma with one eye open. She's not making the call." Ruth gave a dry, approving smirk. "Well, you're the most lucid person I've seen make these decisions all week." Back home, Helen stood in the upstairs hallway, her eyes fixed on the wallpaper peeling near the baseboard. She crouched down and gently tugged the edge. Behind it, barely visible, was the original sage green paint she and Charles had rolled on the walls in 1987. Melissa had called it retirement home green and insisted they repaint in something younger. Helen ran her thumb along the soft, faded wall beneath. "You don't erase something just because you're tired of it," she whispered. The old paint wasn't pretty anymore, but it was honest. It remembered her. She pressed the wallpaper back into place, smoothing it down like a scar she no longer needed to hide. In the garage, she gathered old insurance forms and estate copies into a new fireproof box, labeled it TRUST PRIVATE. Set it beside her emergency kit. The clock in the hallway struck 4 p.m. Shadows slid across the hardwood like bruises. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She checked it without thinking. Text from Melissa. "Sorry if I was harsh. Let's do brunch?" That was it. No real apology, no ownership, no acknowledgement of the birthday toast or the venom behind every compliment. Just brunch. Helen didn't reply. She just stared at the message, then slowly turned to the wall calendar beside the fridge. She flipped it to Friday, uncapped a red Sharpie, and circled the date twice. Helen watched from the front window as the black SUV rolled to a quiet stop by the curb. It didn't belong on this street. Not the way it gleamed. Not the way it idled, calm and waiting, like it already knew how this would end. A woman stepped out, late 40s, navy coat, leather boots, chestnut hair twisted in a neat low bun. No clipboard, no realtor smile. Just a thin leather portfolio under her arm and a cool expression that didn't blink at the weather or the house. Colin stepped out next, jogging to catch up. "Helen," he said as he reached the porch, "this is Allie Vernon. She's the buyer I mentioned. High confidence, all cash, needs to close fast." Allie extended her hand, firm grip, no rush. "Thank you for meeting me. I'd like to move quickly, 14-day close, no contingencies." Helen didn't reply at first. She studied Allie's face, trying to place it. It seemed familiar in the way people do when they belong to a different part of your story. Inside, the three of them settled at the kitchen table. Colin spread out the documents. Allie slid over her financials. Impeccable. Wire confirmation, proof of funds, title search, already pulled. "I understand you'd prefer no showings," Allie said. "That's fine. I don't need one. I just need title clarity and a quiet transfer. No listings, no signs." "No walkthrough?" Helen asked. "I'm buying the bones, not the drapes," Allie replied, tone cool but not unkind. "Your foundation matters more than your countertops." Colin cleared his throat. "Offer is $890,000. Clean. 14 days, no inspections. Helen, if you're ready, I can walk you through the signature line." Helen stared at the pen. The weight of it in her hand felt heavier than the paper beneath it. Flashback. 2 years ago, Melissa had been in this very room, pacing in a silk robe with a coffee cup she didn't pay for. "When you die, I want this house," she'd shouted, rage dripping from every syllable. Not if, when. Helen remembered standing frozen, gripping the edge of the sink, wondering if grief ever ends, or just grows teeth. She pressed the pen to paper and signed. One page, then another, then another. Colin gave a small nod. "That's it. We'll start escrow. Funds in by Friday." Allie closed her folder and stood, pausing before heading to the door. Her gaze lingered on the hallway. "I knew this address rang a bell," she said finally. Helen looked up. Allie's voice was steady. "Melissa Callahan used to work for me, back when I ran corporate strategy for Metaform." The name landed like a stone in a still lake. "She accused me of harassment." Allie didn't blink. "It was false. Fabricated. She didn't like being told no." Colin froze beside the counter. "HR ran an internal. Quiet. No due process. I was terminated. No pension. No apology." Helen's breath caught. She never mentioned that. "Of course she didn't. It's not good for the brand," Allie said. "But her smear bought her a promotion and a platform. And it cost me my reputation." Helen's pulse slowed. This woman hadn't just come for square footage. "You knew this was her mother's house?" "I researched the trust," Allie said, eyes cold with something earned. "I didn't plan on it, but once I saw the name, I made the call within 10 minutes. "And now?" Helen asked, voice almost a whisper. "I've waited years to buy something of hers," Allie said, "even if she doesn't know it." Silence filled the kitchen like steam. No vengeance screamed, no threats made, just justice served. In escrow. Helen led her to the door. Allie paused in the frame, turned back. "You did the right thing, even if it came late." As she stepped off the porch, Helen noticed Colin's mouth twitch, somewhere between shock and admiration. Helen didn't say a word. Later that night, she opened her laptop and logged into the new trust account, Callahan Revocable Living Trust, official, secure, and entirely hers. She transferred the deposit instructions. Her name wasn't on the title anymore. Her control was. Melissa still hadn't texted again. Helen liked the quiet. Helen peeled back the duct tape on the first box with slow precision. The cardboard gave a low groan, like it knew this was no ordinary move. She wrapped the porcelain clock from her grandmother in an old towel, folding the past in layers of linen and quiet resolve. The house, once heavy with sentiment, had started to feel lighter. Not from joy, from detachment, from the quiet subtraction of expectation. Out front, the cherry blossoms had started to fall, coating the driveway like confetti no one stayed to clean. Helen didn't mind. The petals made everything look like it had already been celebrated and abandoned. In the background, a podcast blared from Melissa's Instagram stories, her voice chirpy and triumphant. "Ladies, launch week is here! Manifest it, speak it, claim it!" She was too busy building her brand to notice the house was being emptied behind her. Helen wrapped the antique silver in tissue and dropped it into a storage bin with a soft clink. These were the pieces Melissa had always assumed would be hers. The Waterford vase, the hand-carved mirror, the Civil War letters Charles inherited from his great-uncle. Helen didn't box them for family. She packed them for neutrality, places Melissa would never think to look. She dropped one box at the storage facility 3 towns over, under a name pulled from her grandmother's side, Nora Whitfield. It was a name that felt untouchable. She had the unit key on a chain around her neck. One item she didn't plan to forget. Later that evening, she opened the cedar chest in the hall closet and pulled out the lace table runner Melissa had always hated. It smelled of lavender and Thanksgiving gravy. She laid it on the table just to see it there one last time, then folded it with a sigh. Flashback. Charles sat on the edge of the bed, holding a photograph from his army days. "Don't let her talk you into rewriting everything," he said once, after a fight with Melissa had left Helen in tears. "Your legacy isn't what you leave her, it's what you don't let her take." At the time, Helen had nodded, but she hadn't understood. Not fully. Now she did. She picked up the framed photo of the 3 of them at the Grand Canyon. Melissa had been 15, all braces and attitude. Helen slid the picture from its frame and tucked it into her suitcase. The The frame went into the donation pile. She was done decorating walls Melissa thought belonged to her. The logistics came next. Helen booked an Airbnb under the name Nora Whitfield, a cozy in-law unit on a horse property 20 minutes out. Private entrance, flexible checkout, paid in full. The hostess, a widowed teacher named June, offered to meet her with the key. Helen declined. "I prefer to arrive quietly." Linda arrived the next morning in a station wagon that smelled like peppermint and whiteout. "You sure you don't want to leave her a note?" she asked. "I'm done writing speeches for people who talk over them," Helen said, lifting another box into the trunk. They moved fast. Just one carload at a time. No moving trucks. No noise. By Thursday afternoon, only the furniture Melissa didn't care about remained. The rest, photos, china, books, documents, was safely tucked away in locked units, anonymous folders, or headed to causes Melissa had never asked about. Helen dropped the last donation bag at a charity thrift shop in a town Melissa couldn't spell. The volunteers smiled and thanked her. No one asked who she was or why she looked so light, even with full arms. That night, she made tea and watched the sunset alone on the back porch, the place Melissa once called boring square footage. The sky was streaked in gold and ash. The wind was clean. No more rehearsals in her head. Her phone buzzed. A notification from Melissa's public account. She tapped it once, then watched without blinking. Melissa, standing in front of the house, beaming. Bright filter. Lip gloss. Open arms. "My future house. Manifesting begins." Helen stared at the screen, then whispered to no one, "You're late." On Friday, Melissa leaned forward on her elbows, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown, blonde hair glossed and shining under the late morning sun. "I'm so glad we're doing this," she said brightly, her voice sliding over the tension like syrup. "You look rested." Helen stirred her coffee without answering. The tiny patio table between them wobbled whenever Melissa moved. The smell of cinnamon waffles and burnt espresso clung to the air, but Helen's appetite had vanished the second she sat down. Melissa had chosen the place. Morning Maven, a trendy brunch spot that catered to avocado toast influencers and mimosas served in mason jars. The hostess had recognized Melissa immediately. "We love your content," she gushed, seating them by the sidewalk like royalty. Helen had smiled politely. She'd said little since. Melissa poured herself a second mimosa. "I was thinking," she said casually, "once things settle down, I might rent out the house. You know, when you get to that point where stairs are a lot." Helen cut her eggs with mechanical precision. "I mean, it's just a lot of upkeep for one person, don't you think?" Melissa continued. "I could do something chic with it. Mid-century Airbnb vibes, or host retreats. People pay thousands for wellness weekends these days." Helen lifted her fork and chewed slowly, her eyes fixed just past Melissa's shoulder. A dog barked down the block. A siren howled in the distance, but inside, all she could hear was the sound of her daughter rehearsing entitlement like it was strategy. Melissa dabbed her mouth. "Anyway, you never told me. Are you still seeing that old financial planner? What was his name, the one Dad used to hate?" Helen smiled faintly. "He passed away. Years ago." Melissa blinked. "Oh, right," she sipped. "So, who's helping you now? Anyone I should know?" Helen tilted her head slightly. "Do you think you should?" Melissa gave a breathy laugh. "Well, I am your daughter. I just like to be informed." The words stuck in the air like wet paper. Helen didn't respond. Flashback. 5 years earlier. Melissa at a family gathering, spinning a story about how Helen had refused to help with her wedding. In truth, Helen had offered $10,000, more than she could afford. But Melissa had wanted a vineyard, a live band, and an entrance on horseback. "She doesn't believe in me," Melissa had whispered to an aunt that night. "She's always held me back." The wedding didn't last 6 months. The debt lingered for years. Now, across the table, Melissa grinned over her pancakes. "I've got a few projects in the pipeline, big energy shifts. Real estate is the next phase of my evolution. I feel it." Helen folded her napkin and placed it gently on her lap. "You always did believe in skipping steps." Melissa waved off the jab. Vision, Mom. Not everyone needs to take the scenic route. Helen watched the breeze play with the edge of the menu. Something in her had settled. The ache that used to sit behind her ribs whenever Melissa launched into one of her monologues. It was gone. Not numb, not angry, just gone. She sipped her coffee, now lukewarm, and set the cup down with a soft clink. Melissa leaned in slightly. I saw your place on Zillow. Not listed yet, huh? Helen turned her gaze slowly toward her. No, she said. But you might want to check the county records next week. Melissa blinked. What? Helen smiled. Not sweetly, not cruelly. Just enough. Records don't lie. Unlike brunch conversations. The air inside Colin's office was sterile, still and humming faintly with the sound of the fluorescent lights overhead. A vase of fake hydrangeas stood in the corner like a polite lie, and the notary across the table clicked her pen twice before sliding the last document toward her. This one finalizes the transfer of ownership, she said. Once signed, escrow will complete Friday at 9 a.m. Helen took a slow breath, reached for the pen, and left her name in permanent black ink. No cosigner. No second page with Melissa's name. No daughter hovering at the margins, waiting to inherit. Just Helen Callahan, trustee, seller, survivor. Colin glanced up from the packet. All set, he said. Wire confirmation from Allie came. Through this morning. It's already in holding. Friday is a lock. Helen nodded. And she still doesn't want to do a walkthrough? She said she already walked through the part that mattered. Colin said, a half-smile tugging at his mouth. I didn't ask for clarification. Helen gathered her coat. As she stood, something lightened in her spine, like a lifelong debt had been paid, in full, with interest. Back home, she sat at her desk and pulled open the drawer where she kept the envelope labeled, in case of. Inside, an old obituary draft she'd started years ago after her first health scare. She unfolded the pages. The original version listed Melissa as next of kin, primary contact, and beloved daughter. Helen reached for her pen and began editing. She crossed out Melissa's name, replaced it with a line, no public survivor listed by request. Then she changed the final paragraph. She lived quietly, gave loudly, and loved on her own terms. Satisfied, she slid the revised obituary into a new folder labeled Final. She picked up the phone and dialed the foundation's number, the Haven Project, a nonprofit that supported women recovering from financial abuse. She'd found them 3 months earlier after a deep Google search at midnight, trying to understand if what Melissa had done had a name. A soft-voiced woman named Trina answered. This is Trina at Haven. This is Helen Callahan, she said. I want to finalize my legacy contribution. Of course, Trina said warmly. You had mentioned donating half your estate? Yes, that hasn't changed. Helen paused. But I added something. She explained the trust transfer, the finalized sale, the timing. Trina was quiet for a moment. Then, Miss Callahan, you'll be changing lives. I'm just reclaiming one, Helen replied. At the end of the day, she did something she hadn't done in over a decade. She bought herself a ring. She walked into a boutique on Main Street, still wearing her threadbare gloves from the farmer's market, and asked to see the sapphires. Not for anyone. Not for inheritance. Not for show. The ring was oval cut, midnight blue, set in platinum. It caught the light like a secret. As the jeweler wrapped it, he asked if it was for someone special. Yes, Helen said, slipping it onto her left hand. For the woman who stayed. That evening, she roasted a single chicken breast and poured 1 glass of Merlot. She didn't need celebration. This wasn't victory. It was release. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She let it ring once, then twice, then finally checked the screen. Facebook notification. You've been tagged in a new post by Melissa Callahan. Curious, she opened it. The photo was of Melissa standing in front of Helen's former house, arms outstretched, smile bright, with glitter text across the top. Big announcement coming Friday. Manifested, soar next chapter. The comments were already piling up. OMG, is this your place? Finally getting the keys? You deserve it, Queen. Helen stared at the screen, her lips curling into something between pity and disbelief. At exactly 9 a.m., the digital transfer finalized. Helen sat in Colin's office, watching the escrow confirmation appear on the screen like a verdict. Property closed, funds disbursed. Buyer, A. Vernon. Colin leaned back in his chair with a small, respectful nod. It's done. Helen didn't smile. Not yet. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small cream envelope, the note she'd written the night before, every word carefully chosen and rewritten 3 times until it felt like truth. Back at the house, she stepped into the empty living room one final time. The hardwood floors caught the morning light in streaks. Her footsteps echoed in the hollowness, like memories refusing to die quietly. She placed the envelope on the mantel. No flourish. Just one deliberate motion. The handwriting was firm and centered. This house now belongs to someone who earned it. She stood there for a moment, taking in the smell of the wood polish, the faint lemon cleaner she'd always used. The air was still, but not sad, just clean. Then she turned, locked the door behind her, and left the keys in the lockbox for Allie. 20 minutes later across town, Melissa was filming her Morning Vibes segment in front of the mirror when her phone buzzed. The notification blinked once. Zillow, 338 Sycamore Drive, status, sold. Before she even registered what it meant, she stopped mid-lip gloss swipe. Her smile dropped. Then she ran. The Camry was still in the driveway as Helen pulled out, but she didn't stop when she passed Melissa's SUV speeding in the opposite direction. She didn't need to. She already knew what scene was about to unfold. Melissa burst onto the lawn, still in her high-waisted leggings and branded crop hoodie, her phone clutched in one hand, thumb hovering like she could undo what just happened. The lockbox sat open on the front door. A red and white sold sign had been placed on the edge of the lawn by Colin's assistant less than 10 minutes before. Melissa blinked once, twice, then pounded on the door. M.O.M.? Nothing. She yanked at the knob. Locked. She circled the house, tried the back patio door. Still locked. Even the kitchen window, the one Helen always left cracked, was sealed shut. She ran to the front again and banged with the flat of her hand. "Mom, are you in there?" Her phone buzzed again. Escrow closed. Transaction confirmed. Final buyer, A. Vernon. She stared at the screen like it had betrayed her. Her fingers trembled as she opened her messages and typed, all caps, "What did you do?" Flashback. Helen on the edge of the twin bed, reading Goodnight Moon to a 5-year-old Melissa, who clutched a stuffed rabbit too tightly. "Again," Melissa would whisper. And Helen always did. Every time. Because there was once a time when being wanted by her daughter felt like the greatest inheritance she could ever leave. But that version of motherhood had been overwritten. One manipulation at a time. Helen sat in her Airbnb now, barefoot, legs curled beneath her, a hot mug of tea between her palms. The sun poured in through linen curtains, dust floating like particles of something freshly freed. Her phone lit up with Melissa's message. Helen read it once, quietly, then tapped the screen and held her finger on the contact until a small red option appeared. Block this caller? She pressed it. The screen faded back to silence. She opened her documents folder and found the file labeled Callahan Final Will. She scrolled to the beneficiary page. There it was. Melissa Callahan, removed by amendment, 2025. Helen clicked Save. Then she emptied the trash, digital and otherwise, and didn't look back. Melissa's tear-streaked face filled the phone screen, tilted at just enough of an angle to show her best side. I can't believe she would do this to me, she sniffled, trying to keep her mascara from bleeding into her lashes. My own mother, after everything I've done for her. She was sitting on the porch of the house she no longer owned, her voice trembling just enough to seem unscripted. Behind her, the red and white sold sign stood like an accusation. Thousands tuned in within minutes. The chat erupted. What's going on, Queen? Wait, didn't you just say this was your house? Prayers, babe. Families can be toxic, Af. Melissa pressed the heel of her hand to her forehead. She blindsided me. Sold it to some random woman, didn't even tell me. I was supposed to inherit this, everyone knew that. She exhaled shakily. This is elder abuse in reverse. I don't even know what to call it. Weaponized guilt? Another tear slid down her cheek. The camera caught it perfectly. But then, a comment popped up, different than the rest. Actually, public records say the property was in a trust, never Melissa's to begin with. More followed. It was sold legally under Helen Callahan's trust name. She never had a claim. Y'all better stop weaponizing victimhood. This ain't it. Within 5 minutes, the mood shifted. Her viewers weren't applauding. They were asking questions. Meanwhile, Helen sat on the balcony of her Airbnb, watching the hummingbirds pick at a feeder strung from a pine branch. Her tea had gone cold in her hand, but she hadn't moved. Linda texted first. "She's live, and she's spiraling." A moment later, Ruth sent a single sentence. "Posting the deed documents now, let's end this narrative." Helen didn't respond. She didn't need to. By nightfall, Ruth's tweet had gone viral. Helen Callahan legally transferred her home into a revocable trust before selling. No coercion, no fraud, just boundaries. Attached, screenshots of the notarized deed transfer, the trust document, and the finalized sale confirmation to Allie Vernon. Screenshots spread faster than tears. Melissa's DMs filled with receipts. Her comments overflowed with corrections. Her brand partners, wellness products, flat tummy tea, 2 skincare lines, vanished almost overnight. First came the silence, then came the emails. By Thursday afternoon, her name had been scrubbed from one campaign page, replaced with a pastel-colored "Rebranding in Progress" banner. She posted a story the next morning. Black screen, no text, only piano music and a soft sob audible in the background. Helen's phone rang that afternoon from a 646 number she didn't recognize. She let it go to voicemail, then listened. "Hi, Ms. Callahan. This is Lila Rhodes from the American Ledger. I'm working on a long-form piece about financial gaslighting and generational manipulation, particularly in adult-child dynamics. Your name came up. I'd love to speak if you're open." Helen replayed the message. Once, then again. Financial gaslighting. The words felt like someone had named the invisible bruise. That evening, she walked down the gravel path toward the mailbox at the edge of the property. The sky was lavender, softening into gray. Inside the metal box, 2 catalogs, a local flyer, and 1 envelope. The envelope was plain. No glitter, no branding, no warning. Just cream cardstock, a forever stamp, and Helen's name written in the kind of shaky block letters that made her think of someone unsure if they were allowed to speak. Inside was a handwritten letter, folded into a precise square. She unfolded it slowly, expecting junk, or maybe another quiet attempt from Melissa to manipulate through nostalgia. But the handwriting wasn't hers. The salutation read, "Helen." She paused. The penmanship was neat but masculine. She sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd once peeled oranges for a little girl who used to say, "Please," without being asked. "I don't expect a reply, but I owe you this. I know what Melissa said about you. To me, to others. The truth is, I believed her for a long time. That you were cold, controlling, that you used money to manipulate her, that you only helped when people were watching. I see it now. She was rewriting the story to suit her next audience, and I let her. You were always kind to me. When the marriage fell apart, you didn't take sides. You just showed up. I remember the night I left. She threw your teacup against the wall. You picked up the pieces while she screamed upstairs. You asked if I needed a place to sleep." Helen blinked, the words softening in her chest like rain dissolving dried earth. "I'm sorry I didn't say thank you then. Thank you for not using her behavior as an excuse to become cruel yourself. Thank you for keeping your door open when she slammed hers shut behind me." There was no signature at the bottom, just a quiet line. M. She sat in silence for a long time after. The walls of the Airbnb creaked with settling wood. Outside, a dog barked twice, then fell quiet. Helen looked toward the window. A moth tapped at the glass like a knock too polite to interrupt. How many years had she spent absorbing the blame for Melissa's storms? How many holidays navigating landmines of passive remarks and sideways glares? How many birthday cards had she rewritten, taking care not to trigger a daughter who had decided, somewhere along the way, that love was conditional and control was currency? Flashback, 6 years ago, in Helen's kitchen. Melissa holding a rent bill like a weapon. "If you don't help me this time, you don't get to see the boys anymore." Helen had nodded, quietly written the check, and wondered if she'd just bought permission to be a grandmother. It had never felt like a choice. But now, years later, she realized it had always been one, and the one she'd never made was choosing herself. She rose slowly and moved to the windowsill. There, she kept a single white candle in a glass jar, unscented, unlabeled, clean. She lit it with a match and let the flame dance. For the first time in a long time, the fire didn't feel threatening, it felt like witness. She whispered aloud, not to the past, not to Melissa, not even to Charles, just to the air. I forgive myself for staying too long at someone else's table. The next morning, she walked to the mailbox again. Cool mist clung to the grass. Birds chirped a little too cheerfully for 7 a.m. Inside the box was a thick envelope, white with blush pink floral borders and gold foil accents. A logo at the top, Baby and Bloom Events. The handwriting on the address label was unmistakable, rounded, practiced, Melissa's. Helen slit the envelope open. Inside, a full-color invitation on glossy cardstock. You're invited to Melissa Callahan's baby shower. New chapter, new light, new life. Saturday, 2 p.m. Dress code, earthy chic. No note, no apology. Just a seat request at the same table she'd been pushed away from. Helen stood at the kitchen counter, the baby shower invitation spread open like a page from someone else's fairy tale. The pastel lettering screamed curated happiness. Blush florals, gold trim, a smiling silhouette that could have been pulled from a Pinterest board. A wishlist QR code was printed in the corner. Designer bassinets, organic onesies, a monogrammed stroller that cost more than Helen's first car. She folded the invite neatly, slid it back into the envelope, and tucked it into the recycling bin beneath the sink. That afternoon, she logged into her bank's charitable giving portal. She didn't hesitate, just typed in the name, Safe Start Women's Shelter, Boise. The page blinked open. She entered, donation amount, $5,000 in honor of every mother who had to figure it out alone. Submit. Confirmed. Done. Her phone dinged 15 minutes later. Group message, Melissa Plus, extended fam. Since someone thinks skipping a baby shower is the new love language, just know this. You've made your absence louder than your presence ever was. A few other replies trickled in, some quiet, some awkward. Let's stay focused on the baby. Maybe she had a reason? Helen stared at the message. Then she silenced the thread and placed her phone face down. Outside, the late summer heat clung to everything. Windows, skin, memory. Helen walked the perimeter of the garden behind the Airbnb, the air full of lavender and cut grass. She paused by the bench under the pine tree, sat down, and closed her eyes. Flashback. 19 years old. A bus stop in the middle of a nowhere town. Her coat too thin, her belly just beginning to show. No wedding ring. No plan. Just a folded dollar in her pocket and the address of a free clinic scribbled on the back of a napkin. That girl had shaken in silence as the bus pulled up. She had cried into her collar so no one would hear. Helen opened her eyes and looked up at the sky now, wide, blue, uncompromising. You made it, she whispered to the girl who sat on that bench all those years ago. And you don't owe anyone for surviving. Later that evening, her phone lit up again, this time with a message from Colin. Subject, update, Sycamore House photo attached. Helen tapped it open. The image loaded slowly, her old house, transformed. Freshly painted in a soft ivory, new shutters, planters spilling with wildflowers. A handcrafted wooden sign now hung above the porch. The Nest at Sycamore, a retreat for women rising. Helen stared, then zoomed in. On the side porch sat 3 women, all different ages, sharing tea. No cameras, no posing, just conversation and quiet. A slow warmth bloomed in Helen's chest, deeper than pride, like peace finally finding a place to sit down. And yet, something in her pulled toward the house one last time, not out of regret, but to see what was left behind. She slipped on a wide-brimmed sun hat, sunglasses, and a borrowed jean jacket from Linda's trunk. The retreat had a public open garden, listed on the website. She parked a block away and walked the final stretch. A soft breeze tugged at her scarf as she neared the gate. Lavender and eucalyptus filled the air. The place looked nothing like it had before, but she knew every line of its foundation. She approached slowly, weaving through a cluster of women in sundresses, voices hushed and easy. She reached the edge of the garden, heart steady, when a figure near the porch made her stop mid-step. Melissa, standing on the edge of the walkway, not dressed for guests. Her eyes were puffy, arms folded, body still. She wasn't holding her phone. She wasn't performing. She was just crying. Alone. Helen stepped back into the shadow of a tall hedge, heart thudding. She didn't know what she felt. Pity, sadness, caution. But she knew what she wouldn't do. She wouldn't interrupt. Helen sat in her car parked across the street, engine off, radio muted, window cracked an inch for air. The sky above the old house was overcast, soft gray light dulling the world's edges. Even the garden looked quieter than usual, the wind barely moving the tall eucalyptus that lined the new white porch railing. Across the street, Melissa stood in front of the door, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. She wore a simple cardigan, hair down, no makeup. There was no camera, no curated outfit, just a daughter at the door of the house she thought she'd one day inherit. She knocked twice, waited, knocked again. Helen held her breath. The door opened. Allie appeared in the frame, hair tucked behind her ears, sleeves pushed up. She stepped outside without hesitation and hugged Melissa. A full, real hug. Not staged, not posed. But when Melissa tried to step forward into the house, Allie gently pressed a hand to her arm, paused her. Helen watched as a conversation passed between them, silent, the kind carried in eye contact and shifts of posture. Then Allie shook her head slowly, said something brief, and Melissa stepped back. No fight, no protest, just the quiet thud of reality landing where entitlement used to live. Melissa nodded once, turned, and walked down the steps. She didn't look back. Helen exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. She stayed low in her seat, her sunglasses large enough to hide more than her eyes. She hadn't expected to feel sorry, but that was the thing about grief. It arrived dressed like a stranger, always a little too early or far too late. Flashback. Charles had once sat across from her in their bedroom, polishing his boots like the habit never left him. "She may not know your worth," he said without looking up, "but just don't forget it yourself." At the time, she'd smiled and kissed his cheek. She didn't know how prophetic those words would feel 20 years later. Back in the car, Helen started the engine. The low hum broke the silence inside the cabin, but not her concentration. She took one last glance at the porch. Allie had gone back inside. The door was shut. Melissa was gone. Helen gripped the steering wheel with both hands. Her fingers didn't tremble. There was no sense of victory, only a calm awareness that this chapter was over, and she'd lived long enough to write the last word herself. That night, she returned to her Airbnb and found a small manila envelope waiting at the door. No stamps, no mailing label, just a name on the front. Helen. Inside, a handwritten note, single sheet, thick cream stock. "Helen, you never asked for credit, but I wanted to give you something anyway. You made a choice most people never find the courage to make, not out of spite, but clarity. The nest will always be your legacy too. If you ever want a room here, there's always one waiting." Helen read it twice. The second time slower. She didn't cry, but something inside her softened, a long frozen part of her spirit finally stretching awake. She folded the note, slid it into the drawer beside her journal, and turned off the light. That evening, Helen stared at the cursor blinking on her laptop screen. A single clause sat highlighted in soft blue. Beneficiary, Melissa Callahan. She clicked delete. It vanished like breath on glass. In its place, she typed, "Estate to be divided equally among the Haven Project, Safe Start Women's Shelter, and the Nest at Sycamore. No bloodline, no loopholes, no more hoping that inheritance would rewrite a broken script." She saved the draft and leaned back in the chair, letting her fingers fall into her lap. The room smelled faintly of coffee and rosemary from the potted plant on the windowsill. The light outside was turning gold, a late summer dusk that softened everything but memory. The email had arrived 2 weeks earlier. She hadn't opened it at first, just seen the subject line and let it sit in her inbox, gathering quiet weight. Ancestry DNA update, new parent match detected. When she finally clicked, the name took her breath. Clint Jennings. 99.9% parent match to Melissa Callahan, not Charles. Not even close. Clint Jennings. That name belonged to a summer Helen had buried under 30 years of compromise. A late-night road trip. A bottle of red wine shared in the backseat of a borrowed car. It had been months before she and Charles officially got back together after one of their worst fights. She'd known, somewhere deep down. But she had sealed that knowledge away, and now it had surfaced, not as a scandal, but as an explanation. Melissa had always felt separate, not unloved, but unreachable, as if her heart carried a frequency that Helen couldn't always match, the fury, the resentment, the simmering edge that never quite made sense. Maybe Melissa had always sensed it too. Maybe she'd been acting out her entire life, trying to wound a mother she believed lied by omission. Helen didn't cry. She didn't rage. Instead, she walked to the mirror, looked herself in the eye, and whispered aloud, "You did the best you could with what you had." Then she picked up her pen and opened the small leather journal she'd kept for years, but never shared. On the first clean page, she began her final letter. "Melissa, you are not defined by who created you. You are not defined by who raised you either. You are the sum of every choice you made when no one was watching. I made choices too, some selfish, some survival, some born of love. You were loved, fiercely, quietly, daily. That is true, whether or not you choose to remember it that way. You told the world I abandoned you, but truth doesn't need retweets to stand up straight. I'm not leaving this house behind. I'm leaving the woman who lived in it. I forgive you for not becoming the daughter I imagined. I forgive myself for holding on to that version of you for too long. Goodbye isn't punishment. It's freedom. For both of us." She signed it simply. Helen. The next morning, Linda pulled into the driveway with her oversized leather tote and a travel coffee for each of them. "You ready to finish this?" she asked, handing Helen the pen. They sat in the sunroom while Linda notarized the final pages of the memoir. Helen watched the legal stamps press into the parchment, each one a closing door that didn't slam, but clicked shut with clarity. "I never asked for her to be perfect," Helen murmured. "I just wanted her to be honest with me. Or herself." Linda looked up, voice gentle but grounded. "She couldn't be either. That wasn't your failure." Helen smiled faintly. "Then this story won't be either." That afternoon she sat at her desk, attached the full manuscript to a new email draft, and stared at the subject line for a long time. She typed, "The house that raised her then," hit send. The submission confirmation blinked back at her like a quiet nod. Helen leaned back, folded her arms, and let the silence surround her. Not as absence, but presence. A final page turned. The wind rolled across the Montana Valley in long, thoughtful exhales. Helen stood by the cabin's single-pane window, holding a steaming mug of chamomile as clouds drifted low over the ridge like lazy guardians. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, silver-haired, soft-lined, and steady. She turned toward the small kitchen table, where a round lemon cake with thick buttercream sat waiting. One candle. Blue. Literature. No guests. No cameras. No speeches that veiled mockery as affection. Just silence and sincerity. She closed her eyes and made a wish she didn't need to speak. Then she blew out the candle. The flame surrendered instantly. She hadn't planned on spending her 70th birthday at a writer's residency, but when the acceptance email arrived, "We loved the raw honesty of the house that raised her. We'd be honored to host your next work." She knew it was the right place. It had been almost a year since she'd clicked send on the manuscript submission. She hadn't expected much. A rejection, maybe. Silence, probably. But not a viral book talk trend. Not messages from college students, therapists, strangers in Iowa. One note read, "You didn't just write a memoir. You gave me permission to say no to people I love." Helen printed it out and kept it folded in her wallet, not because she needed validation, but because it reminded her she wasn't the only one who had swallowed herself to keep someone else fed. Her laptop dinged with a new message. She sat down, opened the lid. From Allie Vernon. Subject: Nest Expansion Update. Helen, we've finalized permits for the second building. It'll house 6 women and their children, a mix of therapy spaces and long-term rooms. We're naming it the Callahan Wing. Hope you don't mind. The Sapphire Ring funded the plumbing. They cried when they heard your story. Come visit when you're ready. The door's always unlocked. A. Helen smiled. The ring had been sitting in her jewelry box for months, quietly gleaming with no place to go. One morning, she wrapped it in tissue, tucked a note inside, and mailed it to Allie. This served me once. Now let it serve someone else. She hadn't missed it. She hadn't missed anything. Outside, the pine trees danced gently in the breeze, needles whispering secrets to the sky. Helen slipped on her boots and coat and stepped into the open air. The other writers were still asleep or buried in manuscripts. She liked the early hours, the way the cold bit her cheeks just enough to make her feel alive. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, half expecting it to be Linda or Colin. New email. No subject. The address was unfamiliar. She opened it anyway. I found your book because someone left it on a bench in a train station. I read it cover to cover in one sitting. I cried 3 times. I'm 19, pregnant, afraid, but I'm not alone anymore. Thank you. Helen pressed a hand over her heart. The cold didn't matter anymore. Back inside, she curled into the armchair with a blanket and opened her new journal. On the first page, she wrote, working title, A Life Without Permission. She paused, looked at the quiet cake, at the single blown-out candle. Then she spoke softly, to herself and to the ghost of the girl she used to be. I wasn't uninvited. I just walked out early. Far away in a town she no longer called home, Melissa had not reached out. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was just background, like a radio turned to static. Helen no longer wondered if she should have stayed longer. She had stayed exactly long enough.